So, a barbelled personality, optimistic about the future, but paranoid about what will prevent you from getting to the future is vital. Paranoid about what will prevent. Optimism is usually defined as a belief that things will go well, but that's incomplete. Sensible optimism is belief that the odds are in your favor and over time things will balance out to a good outcome even if what happens in between is filled with misery. And in fact, it will be filled with misery. You can be optimistic that the long term growth trajectory is up and to the right, but equally sure that the road between now and then is filled with landmines and always will be. Those two things are not mutually exclusive, really. The idea that something can gain over the long run while being a basket case in the short run is not initiative, but it's how a lot of things work in life. But it's how a lot of things work in life. By story, the average person can lose that's roughly half the synaptic connections they had in their brain at age 2. As inefficient and redundant neural pathways are cleared out, but the average 20 years old is much smarter than the average 2-year old. Destruction in the face of progress is not only possible, but an efficient way to get rid of excess. Imagine if you were a parent and could see inside your child's brain. Every morning you notice fewer synaptic connection. Hello, hello, Chaudhary Manoj. Hello, bye bye. Connection in your kid's head. You would panic. You would say, "This can't be right. There's a loss, destruction here. We need an intervention. We need to see a doctor." But you don't. What you are witnessing is the normal path of progress. Economies, markets, and careers often follow a similar path: growth and amid loss. Here's how the US economy performed over the last 170 years. But do you know what happened during this period? Where do we begin? 1.3 million Americans died while fighting 9 major wars. Roughly 99.9% of all companies that were created went out of business. Three US presidents were assassinated were assassinated. 675,000 Americans died in a single year from a flu pandemic. Three separate natural disasters killed at least 400 Americans each. 33 recessions lasted a cumulative 48 years. The number of forecasters who predicted any of those recessions rounds to zero. The stock market fell more than 10% from a recent high at least 102 times. Stocks lost a third of their value at least 12 times. Annual inflation exceeded 7% in 20 separate years. The words economic pessimism appeared in newspapers at least 29,000 times according to Google. Economic pessimism. The Hebrew 105. Pessimism. Our standard of living increased 20-fold in these 170 years, but barely a day went by that lacked tangible reasons for pessimism. A mindset that can be paranoid and optimistic at the same time is hard to maintain because seeing things as black or white takes less effort than accepting nuance. But you need certain paranoia to keep you alive long enough to exploit long term optimism. Really. Jesse Livermore figured this out the hard way. He associated good times with the end of bad times. Getting wealthy made him feel like staying wealthy was in, inevitable. Inevitable. 106. That's INAVIT and that he was invincible. We don't know मलाई उसले देउन मोबाइल तिम्रो उहुँ, म तिम्रो चलाउनु छ अरे अर्काको हो यो को अर्का भने को अर्का भनेको भन त भन न हौ। सो मिलाएर साइनाप्टिक भनेको त न्युरोन्स बीचको सम्बन्धमा जोड्ने ठाउँ अरे। साइनाप्टिक इकोनोमिक पेसिमिज्म होइन त्यत्रो बज्दा धेरै ढिला भएर 9:30 बज्छ होला। आर्थिक निराशावाद अरे। अँ inevitable inevitable zero भयो त zero 0 0 why are they zero. Jesselero figured this out the hard way. He associated good times with the end of bad times. Getting wealthy made him feel like staying wealthy as inevitable and that he was invincible. Hmm. 107 खतरनाक भन्छ नि होला नि आफैले आफूलाई के yes it is. Huh? कुन लाएर गएको रे कुन कालो मोजा अझै अमर अरे After losing nearly everything, he reflected. I sometimes think that no price is too high for a speculator to pay to learn that which will keep him from getting the swelled head. A great many smashes by brilliant men can be traced directly to the swelled head. It's an expensive disease, he said. every way to everybody. Next, we will look at another way growth in the face of adversity can be so hard to wrap your head around. Tells you win. You can be wrong half the time and still make a fortune. Did you get that, bro? No? No, no, no. Huh? छैन देख्न त देखिहाल्छ पनि I have been banging away at this thing for 30 years. I think the simple math is some projects work and some don't. China, there's no palaver. Either one, just get on the next on to the next. Brad Pitt accepting a Screen Actors Guild Award. Hans Bergerin fled Nazi Germany in 1936. He settled in America, where he studied literature at UC Berkeley. By most accounts, he did not show particular promise in his youth, but by the 1990s, Berggren was, by any measure, one of the most successful art dealers of all time. In 2000, Berggren sold part of his massive collection of Picassos, Braques, Klees, and Matisses to the German government for more than 100 million euros. It was such a bargain that the Germans effectively considered it a donation. The private market value of the collection was well over a $1 billion. That one of त्यो मैले गरे हो र आफै त्यस्तै थियो नि अचम्म that one person can collect huge quantities of masterpieces is astounding अरे astounding भनेको के हो चम्किनु चम्किनु ASTOUNDING astounding art is as subjective as it gets. How could anyone have foreseen early in life foreseen भनेको के रहेछ हेर ल foreseen के के यसपालि भन त बनाना भाइ बना अँ 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 FORESEEN foreseen how could anyone have foreseen early in life what way to become the most sought after works of the century? You could say skill, you could say luck. The investment firm Horizon Research has a third explanation, and it's very relevant to investors. The great investors bought vast quantities of art. The firm writes a subset of the collections turned out to be great investments, and they were held for a sufficiently long period of time to allow the portfolio written to converge upon the return of the best elements in the portfolio. That's all that happens. The great art dealers operated like index funds. They bought everything they could, and they bought it in portfolios, not individual pieces that they happened to like. Then they sat and waited for a few winners to emerge. That's all that happens. Perhaps 99% of the works someone like Berggren acquired in his life turn out to be of little value, but that doesn't particularly matter if the other 1% turned out to be the work of someone like Picasso. Berggren could be wrong most of the time and still end up stup- stupendiously right. A lot of things in business and investing work this way. Long tails, the farthest ends of a distribution of outcomes, have tremendous influence in finance, where a small number of events can account for the majority of outcomes. That can be hard to deal with, even if you understand the math. It is not initiative that an investor can be wrong half the time and still make a fortune. It means we underestimate how normal it is for a lot of things to fail, which causes us to overreact when they do. Oh my god, oh my god. Steamboat Willie put Walt Disney on the map as an animator. Business success was another story. Disney's first studio went bankrupt. His films were monstrously expensive to produce and finance at outrageous terms. Sorry. Outrageous भनेको के रहेछ हेर त outrageous OUTRAGEOUS त्यही त भने त त्यो अनि त्यो इनिसिएटिभ भनेको लेख्नु त लेखेको त्यहाँ हेर त के रहेछ आज बिर्सेँ मैले इनिसिएटिभ भनेको त्यहाँतिर हेर नि इनिसिएटिभ नभए सर्च गरेर त्यहाँ लेख इनिसिएटिभ भनेको INTUITIVE इनिसिएटिभ सहज हो र सर्च गर न पहिला सहजै अरे outrageous capital monstrously monstrously राक्षस जस्तै भनेको क्या monstrously भनेको सर्च गर न गर्दै गर्दै जाऊ नि त अनि के तलको मान्छे financed at outrageous terms outrageous भनेको आश्चर्यजनक oh my god feeling a little bit tired 6 million people in my house and everyone please welcome to my LV. I'm reading Psychology of money. I would like to understand the psychology of money. I wanna be a billionaire so fucking bad. I'm, I'm gonna be produced monstrously expensive to produce and financed at outrageous sums. By the mid 1930s, Disney had produced more than 400 cartoons. Most of them were short, most of them were beloved by viewers, and most of them lost a fortune. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs changed everything. The $8 million it earned in the first 6 months of 1938 was an order of magnitude higher than anything the company earned previously. Did you get that? Stay consistent. Okay? One day you will get success. It will be the fortune. It transformed Disney Studios. All company debts were paid off. Key employees got retention bonuses. The company purchased a new state of the art studio in Burbank, where it remains today an Oscar turned world from famous to full blown celebrity by 1938. By 1938, he had produced several hundred hours of film, but in business terms, the 83 minutes of Snow White were all that matters. Did you get that? Anything that is huge, profitable, famous, or influential is the result of a tail event, an outlying one in thousands or millions event. And most of our attention goes to things that are huge, profitable, famous, or influential, when most of what we pay attention to is the result of a tale. It's easy to underestimate how rare and powerful they are. Some tale driven industries are obvious. Take venture capital. If a VC makes 50 investments, they likely expect half of them to fail, 10 to do pretty well, and one or two to be bonanzas that drive 100% of the fund's returns. Investment from correlation ventures once crunched the numbers out of more than 21,000 venture financings from 2004 to 2014. 65% lost money too, and a half percent of investments made 10x, 20x, 1% made more than a 20x return. Half a percent, about 100 companies out of 20,000 earned 50x or more. That's where the majority of the industry returns come from. This you might think is what makes venture capital so risky, and everyone investing in VC knows it's risky. Most startups fail, and the world is only kind enough to allow a few mega successes. If you want safer, predictable, and more stable returns, you invest in large public companies. Or so you might think. Remember, tails drive anything. Tails, tails. It's already 30 minutes. We can add another 30 minutes, and then I'll just stop reading, okay? Or So you might think, remember, tells drive everything. The distribution of success among large public stocks over time is not much different than it is in a venture capital. Most public companies are duds. A few do well, and a handful become extraordinary winners that account for the majority of stock market's returns. JP Morgan Asset Management once published the distribution of returns for the Russell 3000 index, a big, broad collection of public companies since 1980. 40% of all Russell 3000 stock components lost at least 70% of their value and never recovered over this period. Effectively, all of the index overall returns came from 7% of component companies that outperformed by at least two standard deviations. That's the kind of thing you would expect from venture capital, but it's what happened inside a boring, diversified index. This thumping of most public companies spares no industry. More than half of all public technology and telecom companies lost most of their value and never recover. Even among public utilities, the failure rate is more than 1 in 10 percentage of companies experiencing. Oh my god. Technology, telecom, energy, consumer, discretionary, healthcare, industrials, materials, consumer staples, financial utilities. The interesting thing here is that you have to have achieved a certain level of success to become a public company and a member of the Russell 3000. These are established corporations, not fly-by-night startups. Even still, most have lifespans measured in years, not generations. Take an example. One of these companies, Carolco, a former member of the Russell 3000 Index. It produced some of the biggest films of the 1980s and 1990s, including the first three Rambo films, Terminator 2, Basic Instinct, and Total Recall. Carolco went public in 1987. It was a huge success, churning out hit after hit. It did $500 million in revenue in 1991, commanding a market cap of $400 million, big money back then, especially for a film studio. Hi, hi, Sunita Mugger. Hello, hello. अँ, दर्शन जेठन साहब हजुर दर्शन 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 नमस्ते हजुर दर्शन नमस्ते के गर्नु जेठन साहब यस्तै छ जिन्दगी गोरेटोमा किताब पढो बसो है अल्छी लाग्छ एकदम ठिक छ जेठन साहब हजुरको के छ सुनाउनुहोस् घरतिर सबैजना आरामै हुनुहुन्छ होला नि घरतिर सबै आरामै हुनुहुन्छ ठिकठाक छ गर्मी कतिको बढ हौ उतातिर मन्थलीतिर What is the name of the house? अटोमेटिक ट्रान्सलेट बन्द गर्नु पर्यो बढ्दैछ हो र अघिदेखि उयो टिलिक टिलिक टल्किरहेको थियो क्यारे खै हिट हजुर हजुर गर्मी बढ्दैछ यता चाहिँ पानी पर्ला 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 जस्तो गरेर छ अस्तिदेखि हिट विदाउट अ स्टर्म फेरि बन्द गर्ने बेला भएको हो कि साँच्चीकै इङ्ग्लिसै लेख्नु भएको अफ त अफै रहेछ त फेरि अघि चाहिँ आइरहेको थियो अलिअलि झलक झिलिक गरिरहेको थियो पानी पनि पर्ला पर्ला जस्तो चाहिँ गरिरहेको थियो परेन होइन त आज नि राम्रोसँग पानी पर्नु सकिएन Especially for a film studio, and then it failed. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. खाना खानुभयो अनि जेठान साहब हजुरहरूले The blockbusters stopped. Five fairy tales like oh, a few big budget projects flopped, and by the mid 1990s, Carolco was history. It went bankrupt in 1996. Stock goes to zero. Have a nice day. के को लिङ्क पठाउनु भयो जेठान साहब हजुरले फाइभ फेरी टेल्स लाइक भनेर पठाउनु भएको छ त फेरि आई एम सरी भन्दै हुनुहुन्छ किन हौ जेठान साहब अटोमेटिक च्याट ट्रान्सलेसन ए यसलाई के गर्नु पर्यो यसलाई अब पिन पिन गर्न नि बिर्स्या हौ मैले त that day खोइ त पिन कसरी पिन गर्छ हौ बिर्सिसके हौ मैले ए छोरीसँग खेल्दै हुनुहुन्छ ए अहिले अहिले हो यो उयो हजुरको प्रिमियर कि प्रिमियम अरे प्रिमियर ए भोलि ए 5 बजे त म त अनि उहाँ हुन्छु त फेरि जेठान छ अफिसमा हुन्छ 5 बजे त ओ पुजु धुजु हेर्दैछौ तिमी पनि ए अब यहाँ यो जति पढ्नु पर्यो अनि छोडिदिनु पर्यो है your brother is also a catastrophic loss and one that 4 in 10 public companies experience over time. Korolko's story is not worth telling because it's unique, but because it's common. Here's the most important part of this story. The Russell 3000 has increased more than 73-fold since 1980. That is a spectacular return. That is success. English beat English हाम्रोतिर नि बिहानभरि गएको 40% of the companies in the index were effectively failures, but the 7% of components that performed extremely well were more than enough to offset and dots. Just like Heinz Berggreen, but with Microsoft and Walmart instead of Picasso and Matisse. Not only do a few companies account for most of the markets written, but within those companies are even more tail events. In 2018, Amazon dropped 6% of the S&P 500's written, and Amazon's growth is almost entirely due to Prime and Amazon Web Services, which itself are tail events in a company that has meet me light के हो मिट मी लाइट जान थाल्यो के भने अहिले तर मिट हार्नुमा त राम्रै गयो है अफ गर्दा गर्दा नि के आउँछ हजुरकोमा त्यस्तो देखिन्छ हार्नुमा त राम्रै देखिन्छ मैले अफ गरे हो त्यो त अघि नै experimented with hundreds of products from the five phone to travel agencies मको यो जान थाल्यो त्यही छ त नि मिट मी लाइट जान थाल्यो अरे प्लिज सेन्ड इट टु मी टु त्यस्तै आएको छ कि त के भएको मैले अफ गरेको हो त त्यो उयो त नि Hey everyone, welcome to my LV. Apple was responsible for almost 7% of the index returns in 2018, and it is driven overwhelmingly by the iPhone, which in the world of tech products is as stealth get. And who's working at these companies? Google's hiring acceptance rate is 0.2%, Facebook is 0.1%, Apple is about 2%. So the people working on these tail projects that drive tail returns have tail careers. यहाँ त्यस्तै खालको आइरहेछ अनि के गर्छु त म The idea that a few things count for most results is not just true for companies in your investment portfolio. It's also an important part of your own behavior as an investor. Napoleon's definition of military genius was the man who can do the average thing when all those around him are going crazy. It's the same in investing. Most financial advice is about today. What should you do right now? And what stocks look like good buys today? But most of the time today is not that important. Over the course of your lifetime as an investor, the decisions that you make today or tomorrow or next week will not matter nearly as much as what you do during a small number of days, likely 1% of time or less, when everyone else around you is going crazy. Consider what you would happen if you saved $1 every month from 1900 to 2090. You could invest that $1 into the US stock market every month, rain or shine. It doesn't matter if economists are screaming about a looming recession or new bear market. You just keep investing. Let's call an investor who does this. Sui. But maybe investing during a recession is too scary. So perhaps you invest your $1 in the stock market. Hold on. When the economy is not in a recession, sell everything when it's an monthly dollar in cash and invest everything back into the stock market when the recession ends. We will call this investor gym. Or perhaps it takes or perhaps it takes a few months for a recession to scare you out, and then it takes a while to regain confidence before you get back in the market. You invest $1 in stocks when there's no recession, sell 6 months after a recession begins, and invest back in 6 months after a recession ends. We will call you Tom. How much money would these three investors end up with over time? Millions of with 435,551. बोली पढ्छु अब बोली पढ्छु उल्लुलुलुलु, ओ ला 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 ला, ला 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 ला। सरी है जेठान साहब यहाँ त के हो आफै उल्टो पल्टो भएर आउँछ यार यो ट्रान्सलेट अटो ट्रान्सलेटहरू के हो यस्तो युट्युब त झन् झन् बकवास भएछ त यार